This podcast is hosted by Sheza Barbour, co-founder of Good Tree Institute, and joined by licensed therapist Archie Aquino and our resident scholar and founder, Dr. Nadia Qatranji.
This is, again, another episode of Timeless Conversations with Good Tree Institute. We'd like to welcome everybody back as we continue our story and the journey of Prophet Yusuf. And this episode, we're really going to be discussing and tackling the issue and understanding of what is your core through studying Yusuf and understanding what his core is and how did he get through the trials and tribulations that get, passed on to him. So we're going to continue on with ayah number 21. And Dr. Nadia, we'd love to have you take it away.
All right. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So where we left off was when Yusuf alayhi salam was taken by a group of people, a caravan who took him basically, and they included him as a merchandise, and they were planning on selling him. And that's where we left last time. So now he is Allah. Let's hear what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says afterwards. وقال بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقال الذي اشتراه من مصر لامرأته أكرمي مثواه. And the one who bought him from Egypt said to his wife, be generous to his stay. So basically now we know that he was bought from a guy from in Egypt, and this person is a very distinct person. We will get to know a little bit afterwards. But the one thing that we know is that he said that he has some good nature. He said, be generous to him. And then he says, عسى أن ينفعنا أو نتخذه ولدا. Maybe he would be of a benefit to us, or that we would take him as a son. So he saw something. It seems that he saw something in Yusuf alayhi salam that drew him into taking him like that. Or subhanAllah, maybe it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan that he wanted that to happen to him, and that's what he threw in the heart of the Aziz. So this person, I just mentioned the word Aziz, this person was the prime minister of Egypt, which was titled as the word Aziz. You're going to hear this word a lot. So that's what it means. He's somebody who's dignified, basically. So this one here basically now gives a transition to a new time for Yusuf alayhi salam. All of these issues that happened to him, basically the tough parts have ended at this stage right now, and he's getting into a new stage of his life where he's going to be raised in the house of the prime minister of Egypt. And in his under his provision, he's going to get from him a lot of the knowledge and a lot of the learning that he's going to get, and that's going to give him a lot of qualification. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving the comment in the next part of the ayah. Look what he says. وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And it's like that we established for Yusuf in the land. وكذلك مكنا ليوسف في الأرض ولنعلمه من تأويل الأحاديث, so that we can teach him he had the capacity to interpret the events. He had the ability to know how to understand things. And this is basically, there is a double thing that's happening here. Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam learned a lot from Yaqub alayhi salam when he was with him as a child. He got that knowledge from a prophet. He got that learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now he's getting another layer of knowledge, which is the worldly knowledge that he got from being with the Aziz himself, with that prime minister of Egypt himself. So that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, see, this is how we established for Yusuf. Right? And this is a point for us to just stop here for a second. Because if you'll go back and look, when he was in the well, that wasn't what was looking. When he had the struggle with his brothers who really were planning on doing real, actual hurt to him, that wasn't in the picture. It wasn't in the picture that he's going to be established in the land, that he's going to be learning from the top people in the world. When he was being sold to slavery, that wasn't the picture. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, see, all of these were steps towards the aspect of where he reached to. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this comment. Look what he says. وَاللَّهُ غَالِبٌ عَلَىٰ أَمْرِهِ. وَاللَّهُ غَالِبٌ عَلَىٰ أَمْرِهِ. And Allah is prevailing. Ghalaba is to overcome and surpass. This is a fact. This is, by the way, a nominative sentence, which is not restricted to any time or place. It's kind of, Allah is saying, Allah is prevailing over his affairs and matters. He's the one who his word is gonna go. It doesn't matter what we think. And that's why he says, وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. However, the majority of people, most people don't know this fact, don't know this reality, that Allah is the one who is prevailing. And then he says, وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَلَمَّا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. When he reached his strength. So he's basically now kind of like he's talking about, okay, he spent several years with the wife, with the Aziz, with the prime minister, and during this time, he basically now he became a full-grown man, but he reached his strength. He said, at that point, آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. We gave him hukm, which is wisdom, وعلم, and knowledge. And this is what I was mentioning in a bit before. He's talking about the wisdom that he got from Yaqub alayhi salam and the knowledge that he got from being with the prime minister of Egypt. And then he ends it by saying, وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And it's like that we reward, we compensate al-muhsinin, the ones who do good and beautiful. And the word muhsin here, we will come to it inshallah as we continue talking. It's somebody, it denotes beauty. That's what ihsan is. Hasuna is denotes beauty. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, he described Yusuf alayhi salam by being a muhsin. We'll get into it inshallah in the discussion as we go further. All right, so let's stop here and see what you guys want to address from what we focused on so far.
Well, I think it's interesting that usually we dwell on our skills, our money, our network, our education, etc., to kind of define our success, or we attribute that to our success. Whereas, as we're learning from what you're saying in the surah and in the ayat, it's really true success is just coming from Allah, right? But we put all this emphasis on, no, it's what I did or what happened to me, what I've gained that, brought me this success, right?
Yeah, and especially just to kind of add to what you're saying, especially we think that it has to go in a certain pattern. Like I have to do this and this and this so I can get to this result.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, go on.
So yeah, it reminds me of when I was just out of high school, and this happens to a lot of young people. Everyone's asking you, what are you going to do? What's your plan? What are you going to be when you grow up? And you have to come up with like your college major, and you have to come up with your 5 to 10 year plan. And I was all about that. I'm going to be a doctor, and I was just gung ho and have finished my undergrad in 4 years, and had it all planned out. And then I was really miserable trying to carry out that plan because I was so rigid in it. I had to get it done and according to this timeline, otherwise I'm some kind of a loser or something, and I would be like a failure. So I was all about controlling it and making it happen. And it wasn't until I had some kind of early midlife crisis when I was 21 years old. It was like, oh, I hate this. This being a doctor stuff sucks. I don't know if it's the life I want. And then I just, opened it up, and I wasn't even Muslim yet. I said, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Help me figure this out. How am I going to be happy? How am I going to use all these gifts you gave me? And I just, and now that I'm Muslim, I was making dua. I didn't even know it. And I just surrendered to God, and I was like, put me where I'm supposed to be. And then after that point, I became much more flexible and open to seeing possible signs of where I'm supposed to go, and just going with the flow of things that were happening in my life. And eventually I ended up where I am now. And, as a counselor, we have this saying, it says, if you want to make God laugh, show him your plans, because it rarely ever turns out that you carry it out. And in the field of psychology, a lot of people who are in the field of psychology ended up in the field of psychology. A lot of us didn't start out that way.
Yeah.
Allah ghalib, that's why they say Allah ghalib, right? Allah is prevailing. Yep.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting you say that, Archie, because it's, you see that a lot in the business world, right? Where they want you to write out and your 5-year plan and your 10-year plan, and you have all these goals that you're trying to accomplish. And I mean, the funny thing is that like, I know me and my husband, we tried doing that, trying to implement this corporate strategy of like, what's our 5-year plan and our 10-year plan into our personal life. And let's like create this plan. And it's just, it wasn't working. And, it just, an example for me just to share that it doesn't always get better and it doesn't always become clear as you get older. That you get stuck in this mentality. You can get stuck in this mentality throughout life of like, I have my plan and this is what we're going to accomplish, whether it's personal or professional or whatnot. And, and it's all really more about letting go and learning the lessons from others and giving up that control. So you're also not suffering through it when things aren't going according to your plan, but really just letting it up to Allah and just learning what Allah is giving to you and what you need to take from that, right?
Yeah, kind of cuts down on that suffering of being stuck to your plan even though things aren't working out. I had a question about Yusuf wasn't really trying to be like this mega successful person or a prominent person in history. So, if that wasn't his plan, what was his drive that enabled him to be so flexible
Yeah,
and change?
This is so great. It's a great question to ask, and that's what's so unique, right? Whether about Yusuf or whether even right now, as people are looking, I mean, going off of what you were saying, Shaza, regarding the 5-year plan, now because of how much things are changing, people who are top in business tell you there's nothing that's called 5-year plan. What you do is you have a vision. You have a vision. You have a clear vision of what you want, like where you want to go. And then you will see as you go, you change things according to the circumstances because things are changing immensely. And same applied to Yusuf. He didn't have that, I'm going to be, the form of what is going to happen wasn't clear, but the vision was clear from the beginning. Remember the
Yeah, that
dream?
that that vision was my dua. I was like, I want to be able to use my gifts. I want to be able to help people. I want to be
There you
kind of a
go.
healer. I want to be an educator.
Yep.
And that was my vision.
Yep.
And then I didn't have a timeline.
Exactly, and that's what's needed. And then because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, see, when Yusuf alayhi salam had that vision, he didn't know that he was going to be a king, and he didn't know that he was going to be put in the well and sold slavery by the same token. So it seems that there is something into it that adds a human element, a maturity that you won't get just by knowledge. You won't get just by learning and expanding on your skills and capacity. There's that deeper element that's there that you get out of it. And, I mean, we all know the examples of the caterpillar. Remember this story of a man asked Allah for a flower and a butterfly, and he gave him a cactus and a caterpillar. I'm just like, why? Why did he have to go through the process to see how the flower is coming out of the caterpillar? Out of the cactus, and how to see the butterfly coming out of the caterpillar? Why didn't he give it to him right away? There is a lesson to be learned that this is how life is. This is how your life is. This is how the baby is born.
Right.
Yeah. And a modern day example is like the movie Slumdog Millionaire. It was out when I was in college or just in my grad program. And throughout that movie, he's going through all these hardships and all these crazy things are happening to him, and he doesn't understand why. But then at the end of the movie, like as he's on this quiz show, like everything that he went through gave him the answers to the questions he was being asked, and that's how he realized his dream of winning the quiz show and winning all the money. And so that's kind of a similar kind of parallel to how this Surat Yusuf was happening. Now people's goal and drive is financial based, and they're going after more and more money, but they're not. I mean, it's just about money. They'll do anything to get the money, and there's no values in it. And so, what's the point of making $1 billion not knowing what to do with it or with yourself? And then they get like Bill Gates. He started going into philanthropy after he was all about computers and stuff, and that's where he started to actually. I think he started to find more happiness.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also I think just as a society, we tend to think that we want everything immediate, right? We want the understanding, we want the like, and it's not, it's like a jagged line. Like we're all moving through all these trials and tribulations. You're moving forward, you're moving upward, but it's not you know, it's not a straight line up. It's like you're going to hit down, you're going to be tested, then you learn from it, then you go back up. So there's all part of the process of and the journey of just being able to change, and change happens, you know, sometimes it's slowly. There is, you know, and it takes time to get there, but you just have to be flexible about and how you get there.
Yeah, yeah, and especially if you recall from the ayah, the last word that we read was the word Allah, where Allah said, وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُحْسِنِينَ. It's like that we reward or compensate the muhsinin, which the muhsin comes from the word hasana, root word hasana, which denotes beauty. So muhsin is a person who basically makes everything beautiful. His actions, his everything comes out as beautiful. This attribute, this trait comes as a culmination of so many things. It does not come out of just knowledge. It does not. There is an aspect of endurance that leads to a person having this ability to have a characteristic like this. Because there are so many things that can come up that are not so beautiful at you, and for you to be able to respond to them with beauty, that requires endurance. It requires that you really were able to go through certain things that were not so great, and you learned how to get the best out of them, how to see the bigger picture, how to go through it and always see there's something behind this that I'm not seeing right now.
Right.
So it is a person who trusts. It's a person who has endurance. It's a person who loves, who with all of these accumulations and going through these types of things, that's what produces a muhsin. You would see it throughout the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the prophets as people of ihsan. A person who acts with beauty, and the only reason why you act with beauty is because you see beauty. You see the beauty in Allah's plan. You see the beauty in how the process is happening. You see the beauty in your vision. You see the beauty in people. And you're able to pull yourself through all of that rather than always looking at the bad part or the negative or why me, why this is happening. You're able to always pull yourself with the fine, between the lines, things that are happening to you, and see through it and reach to the end.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're bringing out, Dr. Nadia, is just, it's touching on the, like, as we're reading through the lines as well in Surah Yusuf, that we're not actually hearing from him, right? So it's like, how do we know about Yusuf's perspective? And the way you're describing it, it's really through his actions. It's we're learning about him through what's happening to him and how he's reacting to things, correct?
Totally. Yeah, it's a very good point. It's like you're noticing how there's not, like we heard Yaqub, we heard alayhi salam, we heard the brothers, we heard a lot of people saying, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking on behalf of Yusuf. He's always talking about how he's doing things, what's going on with him, or how Allah is acting with him. You could see that Allah is showing us through Yusuf alayhi salam what it looks like. How does he interact with a human being? That's the role of the prophets. I say it over and over. That's the role of the prophets, to demonstrate how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala interacts with human beings, to model it, so we can know this happens to me.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is a perfect segue to the next ayah, right? The next story and test that comes with Sayyidina Yusuf, right?
Yep. Yeah, because he was ready now, right? He basically had these few major tests so far and got him where he is right now as a muhsin, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described him, only to find himself now ready for the next two sets of tests that are going to take him again to the next level to achieve his vision. So let's look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says over here afterwards. So now you remember that Yusuf alayhi salam was he was being brought up in the household of the prime minister of Egypt, and he became this young man who is powerful and strong, and he was known to be very handsome. So then what happens is that the interaction happened between him and the wife of the prime minister. You will hear us a lot saying the wife of the Aziz. It's kind of like easier because that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes her in the Quran. So now what happened, they have been living together in the same household, and she's been seeing him all the time with this, not only that he's handsome, he's a muhsin. Again, he is a person of character. He was very charismatic. And the charisma came out of who he is truly. And so she was very attracted to him and she fell in love with him. So now at a certain point, this is what happened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is portraying an incident that happened where she wanted to act on that love that she had for him. So here's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. وَرَاوَدَتْهُ. He starts by saying وَرَاوَدَتْهُ. And rawadathu comes from the root word rawada, which is to seek and ask gently, to go gently back and forth. This is the word that we use for irada, power, willpower, or arada, wanting. This is something that is very, although it's very gentle, and it's kind of like this constant back and forth until you get what you want. So rawada, this is what she's doing with him. There's that very good intention, like I'm very clear what I want and I'm just doing whatever I can to get there. So she did that to him. راودته التي هو في بيتها, the one who he is in her house, عن نفسه, about himself. So the word rawada can be about anything, but when you add عن نفسه, that means she wanted him, she wanted himself. She's not asking him about anything, she wanted him particularly. And then here's what she did. And you can use your imagination to understand what that means, right? It's like as a young woman, we don't know how young she was, but basically, definitely she was attracted to him. And then what she's saying, here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing some actions. And he said, وَغَلَّقَتِ الْأَبْوَابِ, and she closed the doors. And notice the word غَلَّقَ, there is a repetition. So there are so many doors that were locked to secure that nobody is going to see them. And then وقالت, and she said, هيت لك, come on, هيت, it's kind of like she's inviting. So this is a very succinct description. However, you can understand the level of the privacy, the level of the seduction that's happening, the level of all kinds of things that nowadays we can see was happening in front of Yusuf alayhi salam. And our scholars, especially our recent scholars, have mentioned so many details about what it looks like how intense this seduction was happening in front of Yusuf alayhi salam. Yusuf's first reaction was قال, he said, معاذ الله, I seek refuge in God. No way. No, that's his first reaction. Innahu Rabbi. Indeed, he's my caretaker. So here, when he says Innahu Rabbi, let's read the rest of it and I'll come back to it. Ahsana mathwai. He made good my stay. So who is he talking about? And our scholars mentioned two options, right? The first option is that it could be he's referring to the prime minister, the Aziz himself. He said, what do you mean? You want me to betray him? He took care of me. He's my master. And it could be that he's referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is his caretaker and he actually took care of him as well. He says, but there's no way I could do this. إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. The ones who are ظالمون are the ones who misplace things, who put things in the incorrect place. He says, the ones who, and I'm going to be doing the wrong thing. I will not be successful if I do that. لا يفلح. There's no way I can succeed. So, and then look what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. And then he says, وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا. This is very important. And certainly hamma, so al-ham is, the word hamama is to melt, to flow and creep. Like it's something that's very subtle that comes and creeps on you and you melt in. By the way, this is the word that's used for sorrow. Why? Because it kind of like really overwhelms you. And it also is used for the word of intention, like something that I'm fully in, I'm sucked into it and I'm going to do it. That's what the word is. وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ. She fully, that's it. She was so into it in that moment. And then he says, وَهَمَّ بِهَا. And he was into it, into her. And this is a very critical point. It's not that because if he didn't have any attraction to her and he didn't really care and he saw her like, oh, this woman who I'm just like, what are you doing? No, he actually had an attraction to her. He was into her. That makes it more powerful. And then he says, لولا أن رأى برهان ربه. If not, he had seen the proof of his caretaker. In his heart, he knew, like, there's something in me that's going to say, no, I can't do this. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاءَ. And that is because we want to avert away from him the bad, the su' and the fahsha, which is the behavior, the ugly character, which a lot of time denotes the aspects of adultery and these kinds of things. He is from our servants who are mukhlasin, the ones who are chosen, the ones who are very pure and sincere. And that's where you prove that, right? He basically was able to extract this purity inside of him and say no, because he had it. And that's why he was able to do it in this capacity. All right, so let's get to our conversation now from what we've talked about.
Yeah, I think that the choice of words is just really powerful here. And it paints such a powerful picture of what is going on, you know, when you really look at the words and like as you dissected them.
Yeah, I and probably a lot of other people just we think of prophets as like these I don't know, superhuman people who have, you know, a different experience than a normal human would. And so I didn't interpret that like Yusuf was into her as much as she was portrayed being into him. And to see that he was actually into her adds kind of like more meaning to how he was able to refuse.
Totally. Absolutely, yeah, and this is something. I mean, it started with prophets just to see how, and that's the uniqueness of having them being human beings with all their emotions, with all the feelings, with all the things that human beings have, so we can learn from them. Because if he was this perfect person or angel or whatever, in whatever other capacity, we can't relate. We could say, okay, well, I mean, he doesn't have these feelings. He didn't show me what it looks like to have such feelings and to be able to stop. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, like, you know, so far Yusuf has had two major tests already. You know, he was thrown into the well, he was thrown into slavery, and this is the third one. This is the third test he has. But this is a test of desires. So what's interesting about this one is that this is about him. It's his choices. The other tests that he had were things that happened to him. But now it's like, what is he going to do here? You know, how are you going to control your desires? You know, we don't address controlling our desires these days. It's just more about our feelings, and we're always told, just, at least in these societies that we live in, just do whatever you want to do, and, you know, don't rein in your desires, just unleash everything. But we're getting a totally different, you know, role model here.
And in modern society, it's they kind of flipped it and they say, oh, you know, if you just do what you want, you're actually empowered. And you know, people having, you know, casual sex and you know, entertaining all their desires is, and they're not even trying to like get into the structure of marriage and families. And it's really having a negative effect on society as a whole, as we see less and less families, you know, being formed and people staying in their families. And so it's really destroying our family structure, and, you know, it has a negative effect on humanity in general.
And by the way, just as a side note, definitely we're actually seeing how much this is impacting family structure and all of that. And I say this very easily, and I know that this is very important to understand for ourselves. There is no spiritual practice, whether in a religion or in any spiritual practice, that can allow for something, that can kind of adhere to something like this. With this kind of like free sex, with this kind of behavior, it really does prevent your spiritual
Mm-hmm.
growth. It puts a block on your spiritual growth, and this is a fact. And I'm saying it's a fact because you can go and you could see from practices, as you're saying, it's not only impacting the society, but it's actually impacting the human being. Yeah, you feel that you're free and you could do whatever you want, but at the end of the day, you're just like, there is that heaviness that happens.
Right. Well, and then we also, we see and we hear from people that, like, even after they've gone through like this promiscuous free society, in the end, after they go through all that, they're like, you know what? I just want stability. I just want a partner. I want a normal relationship. I want to have what is just like almost true and good instead of this just free for all. So, and so it's just been interesting how um we're seeing the ramifications of like that's being played out in our societies right nowadays, because of just just falling into your desires and just going after your lust and just not really having any inhibition personally, and also not having a spiritual path on like, well, why would you check yourself? Why should we check ourselves? For ourselves as individuals, but then also for those that we interact with.
Yeah, we see a lot of what we call in psychology sublimation of these desires. So, instead of using the families as a way of kind of addressing this, now people are, using their pets instead of having kids to devote themselves and give themselves a sense of purpose. And people are
Mm-hmm.
using porn as a way of, satisfying those desires without having to be in a relationship.
Because it's easier,
And
right?
yeah, it's less hassle. So it's on demand, and
Yeah.
it's prevalent everywhere. Sometimes it even comes at you without
Yeah.
even you typing anything in. It'll be a pop up somewhere.
It's like
It's just
super accessible,
so
and it's
easy.
affecting the Muslim community. I mean, this is all of this is affecting our Muslim community. It's affecting our Muslim teens, and young adults. Like, this is just so pervasive, yet we don't really talk about our soul, right? And how do we navigate through
Yeah.
this from really a soul perspective, and why we should do that.
Yeah, the numbers are scary. If you come to hear how prevalent pornography is in the Muslim community, of course, in the Muslim world in general, and like the top three countries that consume the most pornography are Muslim countries. And in the West, also, when you talk about pornography and the consumption of it among the young adults, it is or adults in general, it's really high. It's really high. I mean, I can't remember the statistics on top of my head, but it's really high. And a lot of them are actually practicing Muslims, committed people who consider religion as something that is very dear to them. Yet at the same time, we know that it's very addictive, and it is a very daunting practice when people come to it, and it becomes something that you're overwhelmed by.
Yeah. I mean, so Nadia, like, for those that really, for those that really want to stop it, those that do have that addiction and have gone down that route of just fulfilling their desires, whether in any way, whatever way they see, you know, um, I think the first step is really talking about how it's impacting you personally, like if you're in that space.
Yeah,
But I would love for you to share
yeah,
as well, like, just the influence of your soul and how it, how do we overcome these traumas and these
yeah.
desires, and kind of like some of these, that conversation about the soul and how we
Yeah,
overcome this.
yeah, and you just said it right. I mean, it's really when it comes to whether it's a trauma or desire. By the way, it's very interesting that the solution to both of them is very similar. It's an inner thing. It's something that you have to, it's like you're looking at two different worlds. There is the world of the whatever we are dealing with, and that's how we are interacting with it. When something very bad happens to me, I get sucked into it and I get depressed. Or if something very tempting, I just get sucked into it. So at the end of the day, it's like my psyche and my ego is getting sucked into it, in whether attachment or resistance, right? And there's no solution over here. You really can't get anything out of this. But what you have to know is that there is a much bigger part. That's your soul, that's your conscious, that's much huger, much more impactful than all of this aspect. And until you access that and you empower that part and you let that part basically be the driver, you really have no shot in dealing with whether the desires or the trauma. And that's exactly what we saw with Yusuf alayhi salam. There is the world that Yusuf was living in, and why he was able to right away snap himself out of it and say, no, he's my Rabb. I can't do this. How did he snap? It was his ruh that was so powerful, his soul, that was able to pick it up. There was this beautiful story, by the way, and that's why we say it's not only prophets. A young Muslim who just became a Muslim in New York. And this story is mentioned in the book Heart's Turn. If you haven't read this book, definitely read it, by Michael Seguch. It's a very beautiful story. He mentions that he was from New York and he really loved this girl. And one time he saw her and he was able to be with her after he became newly a Muslim, and they had a very intimate connection. And he saw her and he was being able to be with her. And he just talks about how they were so intimate to the point that we're in the same bed under the same blanket. And then in one moment, he just jumped out of it. Just like, I can't do this. I'm a Muslim. And he just ran. And that's the story says that a few years later, he saw a girl. He just was walking. He saw a girl who was hijabi. He was putting a scarf on, and he was talking to her, and just like she was a Muslim, and saying salam to her and all of that. And then he looked and he recognized her. He said, "How did you become a Muslim?" She said, "It's because of you. I've never seen a human being who is in a situation like the situation we were in, who was able to snap himself out of it and just go and say, no, I won't do this." And she said, that triggered me to go and learn about this Islam. I want to know, who are these? Who is this person? And that's what got me into it. And I embraced Islam. So there is that capacity that we have as human beings. We just have to activate it. We first have to believe it's there, and we have to really bring it out. That's what makes us human beings.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of whether you're going to address the stress of a situation through some sort of coping strategy, or if you're going to go deeper and change your belief about the situation, and which is kind of more impactful and more permanent. And that happens a lot of times with I had one client tell me that she's had previous therapists and she didn't like them because the therapists were just teaching her coping skills, how to deal with her anxiety, but they weren't really addressing the thoughts and whatever the trauma that caused the anxiety. And so it just felt like it was temporary relief and Band-Aids, but it wasn't really full relief, and it really wasn't getting to the core issue.
Yeah.
And it's like that with teens today. It's like a lot of them have these anxieties because they're not really having tough conversations with the people who are causing them to have their anxieties, even with their parents.
Yeah.
And so there's all these issues about, I'm just going to cope instead of I'm going to, shift this mentality and this inner core issue.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, by the way, I mean, this is what's meant when we say the word of surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is where it comes from. Like that, what Yusuf alayhi salam did, or what the man in this story did, is they basically surrendered to Allah, just like right away in that moment. Like, no, I'm bigger than that. So one thing I want to say, this doesn't happen overnight. The shift happens, and you have to know that in a moment, it happens in a moment. But you experience what it's like to be in this moment. And then you can go back. You might fall, but you learn like, oh, that's what it looks like. You tried it once, and then you can try it again, and then you can try it again. Whether with the trauma or whether with these challenges that we have, once you know how to do it once, then you have access to actually doing it more. But it doesn't become more stable right away. It's something that you have to go through different times until you become that person who is really able to surrendering yourself to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You experience it for moments in the beginning, but do it frequently enough to become more stable for you. That's why in the Islamic tradition, they distinguish between what we call a hal, a state. Like the state you become in at one point where you suddenly say, no, I'm not doing this. It's a moment. You might go off of it, but you try it enough until it becomes a maqam, a station, something that you're really standing in, and it becomes more you.
Oh, I think that's kind of interesting because as a new Muslim, like you hear abid and it's like this elevated state, and you think it's like bestowed upon people by Allah. Just all of a sudden they're abid, and then they're going to be acting in this abid state of being. you know, but it's like, oh no, there's actually a process of attaining it that
Yeah.
takes time.
Yeah. And if you embrace it, you will enjoy it. You will really love it. And it's kind of like it's not a linear, right, process. It's kind of like more of a zigzag. You go up and down but as you're going up and down, it's getting better, right? It's still but if you zoom out, you see a line, but if you really look into it, it's not that straight.
Right. I mean, you have to have the patience with yourself and just, put in the work, even though people don't want to. They don't want to. I mean, we're in a society and it's time of state where everyone just wants instant gratification, instant success, instant everything, right? But really, we need to slow down and be able to reflect on things and just keep working. It's just a work in progress. But
yeah, and give ourselves that grace of the ups and downs.
Exactly.
People get so discouraged and like, oh, I failed, and then they just give up. And it's like, no, that's part of the process. You got to have some, it's not linear.
It's not. And that's why to address, especially when we're talking about desires, I think there are two prerequisites I would say to do. The first thing is basically acknowledge the reality of where you're at. You could say, hey, I'm really addicted to this, or I'm really weak in this. Like, just acknowledge where you're at. And along with acknowledging, the very, very important one is, as you said, Archie, is to be okay with that you are there and forgive yourself. Because if you're going to always feel ashamed and guilty, you can't go anywhere, as Archie said it several times so far.
That shame adds another layer of resistance.
Yeah, you just don't want to see it. You don't want to acknowledge it. So these are so important. Wherever you're at, just say, okay, this is what's happening. I'm actually addicted to this. I cannot resist this. Be clear and say, you know what? That's my humanity. That's fine. I'm going to accept it, and I'm going to acknowledge it, and I'm going to forgive myself, ask Allah for forgiveness, and then that allows you now to get into the next piece. So the next piece, there are two pieces. We're going to address one today, and inshallah, at a future session, we will have a full session about the rest. The most important one is to start getting to that inner part of you. Start reaching it. Start basically connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Start unveiling that. And by the way, the aspect of acknowledgement in itself and the aspect of forgiveness in of itself is going to allow you to see your ruh. This world is the world that you need to make strong and powerful so you can use the next parts, which are the tips and the support system that you need, practical steps to be able to get out of the addiction that you're in or whatever desires that you're in. But the most important one is to really have that strong core.
Yep. I mean, for the listener, just as a recap, as we close down this session, it's just to remember that, Allah had a plan for Yusuf and all his tribulations. It didn't make sense. And it was traumatic for him, but it was all part of his journey and a process for him to mature and become who he is. And, this applies to every human being. It's only after the fact that you'll realize how useful it is until you get to that point of trusting Allah, right? Where you're going through it, you're reflecting, and you're learning to trust Allah more and more, so it becomes easier with every test. But we do have a suggestion for our listeners and, really for all of us, is to go back and reflect on your life. Journal, write down, your journey in life. Where have you been down? And and really see and pinpoint how Allah pulled you through this and how you grew out of this. So take the time to journal, write, and connect the dots of your story. That's part of the process of learning how to trust Allah and seeing that He's always been there for you and He's always been there for us during our trials and tribulations. And then as far as addressing Yusuf's test with the wife of Aziz and addressing how to deal with desires, we're actually going to have a live conversation at our next episode and discuss this with experts on tips and just having an open discussion about how do we deal with desires, how do we overcome it, and how do we strengthen our core with the trials and tribulations that we might be going through or many might be going through these days. So hopefully we'll see you again at our next episode, and we'll continue our conversations about Yusuf, real life trauma, real life, tests and trials and tribulations, and how we can lift ourselves out of it. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
If you like listening to our conversation about the Quran, imagine how much more you would get out of participating in a live conversation about the Quran with Dr. Nadia and a room full of people engaging with the Quran. Join us at our next in-person Seeds of Wisdom retreat, online with our weekly Quran and Me sessions, or for the youth at one of our Camp Z retreats.